It wasn't supposed to last. He was just supposed to fill the space my ex left behind while he was locked up. I didn't expect him to fall in love or to start talking about the future. So when my ex came home and I drifted back to where I belonged, I didn't think I owed anyone an explanation. But somehow he found out. And now I'm the villain in a story I never meant to finish writing. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Now, let's get back to the story. Matt was sitting on my couch when I got home from what I'd told him was a girls' night out. He had his phone in his hands, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. My stomach dropped as I realized what had happened. "Hey, babe," I said, trying to sound casual as I set my purse down. "You're up late. Everything okay?" Matt held up his phone without saying a word. On the screen was an Instagram story from someone at the party I'd actually been at. A party where I'd been all over Trey, my ex-boyfriend who'd just gotten out of prison 2 months ago. In the photo, Trey's arm was around my waist, and I was looking up at him with an expression I'd never used for Matt. We looked like a couple. We looked like we belonged together. "Want to explain this?" Matt asked quietly. I opened my mouth to lie, to say it was just an old friend, to gaslight him into thinking he was overreacting. But looking at his face, I could see that he already knew the truth. "Matt, I can explain." "Is this Trey?" he asked. "The ex you said you were over." I nodded, feeling my face flush with guilt and panic. "How long has this been going on?" "It's not what it looks like," I said weakly. Matt stood up and walked toward me, still holding his phone. "Zoe, I'm going to ask you one more time. How long have you been seeing him?" "Since he got out," I whispered. 2 months. Matt was quiet for a long time, just looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I'd ever heard it, so our entire relationship was just you waiting for him to come back. "That's not true." "You knew I wasn't over him," Matt said, and I realized he was quoting something I'd said to him months ago when we first started dating. "You told me that." "And I said I didn't care, that I'd wait for you to be ready, but you were never planning to be ready, were you?" I couldn't answer because he was right. I had never planned for Matt to be permanent. He'd been a placeholder, a way to pass time until Trey got out and my real life could start again. "I'm done," Matt said simply. He walked to the door, then turned back to look at me one more time. I hope he was worth it. Then he left, and I was alone with the reality of what I'd done. Let me explain how I got to this point, because I need you to understand that I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just trying to survive a difficult situation the best way I knew how. My name is Zoe, and I'm 24 years old. 2 years ago, my boyfriend Trey was sentenced to 18 months in county jail for assault charges. It was devastating at the time because Trey had been my whole world for 3 years before that. Trey and I had the kind of relationship that was intense and passionate and dramatic. He was unpredictable and exciting, the kind of person who could make me feel like the most important person in the world one day and completely invisible the next. Our relationship was rocky, full of fights and breakups and tearful reconciliations. Trey was jealous and controlling, but he was also magnetic in a way that made me feel addicted to him. I'd never felt such intense emotions about anyone before. When Trey got arrested, I promised I'd wait for him. I visited him every week, put money in his commissary account, and turned down other guys who tried to ask me out. I was completely devoted to him and our future together. But after about 6 months, the loneliness started getting to me. Visiting Trey through glass partitions and talking to him on monitored phone calls wasn't enough to sustain me emotionally. I was 22 years old and felt like my life was on hold indefinitely. That's when I met Matt at a coffee shop near my work. He was everything Trey wasn't: calm, stable, emotionally available. He had a regular job as a graphic designer, his own apartment, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person. Matt asked me out several times before I finally said yes. I was upfront with him about my situation, that I had an ex in jail who I was still technically with, that I wasn't looking for anything serious. Matt said he understood and didn't expect anything from me that I wasn't ready to give. He just wanted to spend time with me and see where things went naturally. Our first few dates were casual and comfortable in a way I wasn't used to. Matt listened when I talked, remembered details about my life, and never made me feel like I was walking on eggshells around him. He was the complete opposite of Trey's unpredictable intensity. With Matt, I always knew where I stood. He was consistent and reliable and kind, which should have been refreshing after years of Trey's emotional rollercoaster. But honestly, I found Matt a little boring compared to what I was used to. He didn't make my heart race or keep me guessing about his feelings. Our relationship felt safe and stable, but it lacked the excitement and passion I'd become addicted to with Trey. Still, I kept seeing Matt because he filled a void in my life. He gave me companionship and affection during a time when I was incredibly lonely. He made me laugh and helped me forget about my problems, at least temporarily. I told myself it was harmless. I wasn't technically cheating on Trey because we'd never explicitly discussed exclusivity while he was locked up. And I wasn't leading Matt on because I'd been honest about my situation from the beginning. But as weeks turned into months, Matt started falling for me harder than I'd expected. He began talking about the future, making plans that extended beyond Trey's release date. He introduced me to his friends and family, treating me like a real girlfriend instead of a temporary distraction. I started feeling trapped by his expectations and affection. Matt was giving me more emotional intimacy than I'd ever experienced, but I knew it couldn't last. I was just marking time until Trey got out and my real life resumed. I complained about Matt to my friends in our group chat, calling him clingy and boring. I said he was a good temporary boyfriend, but not someone I could see myself with long term. I called him my emotional crutch and joked about how he was just keeping me company until Trey came home. But around Matt, I acted sweet and grateful for his attention. I let him believe that our relationship was developing naturally, that I was slowly getting over my ex and falling for him instead. The truth was that I never stopped thinking about Trey. I counted down the days until his release and fantasized about picking up where we'd left off. Matt was a pleasant distraction, but he was never the main event. About 4 months into dating Matt, I got the call that changed everything. Trey was being released early for good behavior. He'd be out in 2 weeks. I felt a rush of excitement and anticipation that I hadn't experienced in over a year. Finally, I could stop pretending and get back to my real relationship. I could stop feeling guilty about using Matt as a placeholder and return to the person I was supposed to be with. But I also felt nervous about how to handle the transition. Matt had become more attached to me than I'd anticipated, and I knew that ending things abruptly would hurt him. I decided to gradually pull back from Matt rather than have a dramatic breakup conversation. I started being less available, claiming I was busy with work or family obligations. I responded to his texts less frequently and avoided making concrete plans. Matt noticed the change in my behavior immediately. He asked if everything was okay, if he'd done something wrong, if I was having second thoughts about our relationship. I assured him that everything was fine, that I was just going through a stressful period and needed some space. I promised that things would go back to normal soon, knowing that was a lie. When Trey got out, I was waiting for him at the release center. Seeing him again after more than a year apart was overwhelming. He looked different, leaner, more hardened, but still unmistakably the man I'd fallen in love with. We spent that first day together, reconnecting, talking about everything that had happened while he was away. Trey was grateful that I'd waited for him and eager to pick up our relationship where we'd left off. Being with Trey again reminded me of everything I'd missed about him. The intensity, the passion, the feeling that anything could happen at any moment. Matt's steady reliability seemed boring and predictable in comparison. I started seeing Trey regularly while continuing to date Matt. I told Matt I was busy with work projects or family obligations while I was actually spending time with my ex-boyfriend. I rationalized that this wasn't really cheating because Matt and I had never made any formal commitments to each other. I'd always been honest about my feelings for my ex, so Matt knew what he was getting into. But I also knew that if Matt found out about Trey being released and us reconnecting, he'd be devastated. So I kept it secret, deleting text messages and call logs, being careful not to post anything on social media that would give away what I was doing. For a few weeks, I managed to balance both relationships. I'd see Trey a few times a week and Matt once or twice, keeping them completely separate from each other. With Trey, I felt like myself again, passionate and alive and unpredictable. With Matt, I felt calm and secure and appreciated. I told myself I could have both for a little while longer before making a decision about which relationship to prioritize. But maintaining the deception was exhausting and stressful. I had to remember which stories I'd told to which person, which activities I could mention, and which I had to keep secret. Matt started noticing that I seemed different. I was dressing up more when we went out, checking my phone constantly, seeming distracted even when we were together. He asked several times if there was someone else, and I always denied it. I said I was just going through a lot of changes in my personal life and needed his patience while I figured things out. Matt was understanding and supportive, which made me feel even worse about deceiving him. He kept saying he'd wait for me to work through whatever I was dealing with, that he wasn't going anywhere no matter how long it took. His unwavering loyalty made me feel guilty, but also trapped. I didn't want to hurt him, but I also couldn't give up my relationship with Trey. I was paralyzed between two different versions of my life. The situation came to a head 3 weeks after Trey's release. I'd gone to a party with Trey and some of his friends, completely forgetting that several people from my social circle would be there too. I got caught up in the moment, drinking and laughing and acting like Trey's girlfriend without thinking about the consequences. Someone posted a photo of us together on their Instagram story, and I didn't even realize it until it was too late. That's how Matt found out about Trey being out of jail and about me seeing him behind his back. Not through an honest conversation or a planned confession, but through social media evidence that I couldn't deny or explain away. When Matt confronted me that night, I initially tried to minimize what he'd seen. I said Trey was just a friend now, that we'd run into each other at the party and taken a photo together for old time's sake. But Matt wasn't buying my explanations. He'd done the math and realized that Trey must have been out for weeks without me mentioning it. He knew I'd been lying to him about where I was and who I was with. "You knew I wasn't over him," I finally said, repeating something I'd told Matt months earlier when we first started dating. "And you knew I didn't care," Matt replied. "You knew I was willing to wait for you to be ready. But you were never planning to be ready, were you?" His calm disappointment was worse than if he'd yelled or gotten angry. I could see that I'd broken something in him that couldn't be repaired with apologies or explanations. Matt left that night without a dramatic scene or ultimatums. He just quietly walked away from our relationship, and I didn't hear from him again. For the first few days after our breakup, I convinced myself that I'd made the right choice. I was back with Trey, the person I'd really wanted all along. Matt had been a nice distraction, but he was never going to be my forever person. Trey and I fell back into our old patterns quickly. We spent every day together, making up for lost time and reconnecting physically and emotionally. But within a few weeks, I started remembering why our relationship had been so difficult before his incarceration. Trey was jealous and possessive, constantly questioning where I'd been and who I'd been with. He was angry that I'd dated someone else while he was away, even though I'd ended that relationship to be with him. Trey was also struggling to readjust to life outside of jail. He was angry and frustrated about his situation, and he often took those feelings out on me. Our conversations turned into arguments, and our romantic reunions devolved into fights about trust and loyalty. I started missing the peace and stability I'd had with Matt. With Matt, I'd never had to worry about his mood or walk on eggshells to avoid conflict. He'd been consistently kind and supportive, never making me feel like I had to earn his affection. But it was too late to go back. I'd burned that bridge when I chose to deceive Matt instead of being honest about my situation. About a month after our breakup, I saw on social media that Matt was dating someone new. Her name was Sarah, and she looked like everything I wasn't: quiet, wholesome, stable. In their photos together, Matt looked genuinely happy and relaxed. Seeing Matt with someone else triggered a jealousy I hadn't expected to feel. I'd thought I was completely over him, but watching him build a new relationship made me realize what I'd lost. Sarah seemed like the kind of person who would never use Matt as a placeholder or deceive him about her feelings. She looked like someone who could appreciate his kindness and consistency instead of finding it boring. I started checking Matt's social media obsessively, looking for signs of trouble in his new relationship or hints that he missed me. But everything I saw suggested that he was moving on successfully and building something real with Sarah. Meanwhile, my relationship with Trey continued to deteriorate. He was becoming increasingly controlling and paranoid, accusing me of still having feelings for Matt and threatening to leave if I didn't prove my loyalty to him. The intensity that had once attracted me to Trey now felt exhausting and toxic. I missed the emotional safety I'd felt with Matt, the confidence that I was valued and respected regardless of my flaws. I started reaching out to friends who'd known Matt and me as a couple, hoping to get information about his new relationship, or maybe find someone who could put in a good word for me. But what I discovered was that most of our mutual friends had sided with Matt after our breakup. They'd seen how I'd treated him and concluded that he was better off without me. Several people told me that Matt had shared some of our private conversations with close friends, including screenshots of my group chat messages where I'd called him my emotional crutch and temporary boyfriend. Realizing that Matt had seen those messages made me feel sick with shame. He'd known all along that I didn't take our relationship seriously, that I'd been using him to pass time until Trey returned. But instead of confronting me about it or ending things immediately, Matt had continued to invest in our relationship, hoping that my feelings would eventually change. He'd believed that if he loved me enough, I'd eventually choose him over my ex. The fact that he'd known about my true feelings and still tried to make our relationship work made his eventual heartbreak even more devastating. I'd taken advantage of his hope and optimism, leading him on even when I knew it would end badly. 3 months after our breakup, I finally worked up the courage to reach out to Matt directly. I sent him a long text message apologizing for how I'd handled everything and asking if we could talk. Matt didn't respond for several days, and when he finally did, his message was brief and polite. I appreciate the apology, but I think it's better if we don't have contact. I hope you're happy with Trey. I tried calling him, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I sent more texts explaining that I understood now what I'd lost, that I'd made a terrible mistake in choosing Trey over him. But Matt never responded to any of my attempts at communication. He'd clearly decided that our chapter was closed and wasn't interested in reopening it, even for closure or friendship. Desperate to get his attention, I showed up at his apartment one evening. I rang the doorbell repeatedly, but he didn't answer even though I could see lights on inside. Finally, I heard his voice through the door. "Zoe, please leave. I don't want to see you." I begged him to just give me 5 minutes to explain, to let me apologize properly for how I'd treated him. But Matt was firm in his refusal to engage with me. "You made your choice," he said through the door. "Now I'm making mine." I sat outside his apartment for an hour, hoping he'd change his mind and come out to talk to me. But eventually, I had to accept that Matt was serious about cutting me out of his life completely. The rejection was devastating in a way I hadn't expected. I'd thought that if I just explained myself properly, Matt would understand that I'd been confused and scared, not intentionally cruel. But from his perspective, I'd used him as emotional support while secretly planning to abandon him for my ex-boyfriend. I'd lied to him for months and only confessed when I was caught red-handed. There was no explanation that could justify that level of deception and betrayal. Matt had every right to protect himself from further hurt by refusing to give me another chance. My relationship with Trey finally imploded 4 months after his release. The constant fighting and jealousy had worn us both down, and we couldn't recapture the connection we'd had before his incarceration. Trey moved in with his cousin across town, saying he needed space to figure out his life. I suspected he was seeing someone else, but I was too emotionally exhausted to fight about it anymore. Suddenly, I was completely alone for the first time in years. No Trey, no Matt, no relationship to distract me from my own problems and mistakes. I spent most evenings scrolling through old text messages from Matt, remembering how kind and patient he'd been, even when I didn't deserve it. I reread conversations where he'd talked about our future together, about trips we'd take and plans we'd make. I also found the group chat messages where I'd made fun of his sincerity and called him boring. Reading those messages now, I could see how cruel and dismissive I'd been about someone who genuinely cared about me. Matt had given me the kind of love that most people spend their whole lives looking for: consistent, patient, unconditional, and I'd thrown it away for someone who'd never really valued me as a person. The worst part was realizing that I'd never actually been torn between two men. I'd been using Matt as a security blanket while I waited for my real relationship to resume. I'd never seriously considered choosing him because I'd never seen him as a real option. But now, sitting alone in my apartment with no one to call and nowhere to go, I realized that Matt had been the real option all along. He'd been the one offering me genuine partnership and emotional security. Trey had only ever offered me drama and uncertainty, the addictive high of trying to earn love from someone who was emotionally unavailable. I'd mistaken that chaos for passion and chosen it over something real and healthy. Now I was left with nothing: no Trey, no Matt, and no prospects for either relationship working out in the future. I'd destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to me for someone who'd never really wanted to be with me in the first place. I kept thinking about what Matt had said the night he left. I hope he was worth it. The answer was clear now. Trey hadn't been worth losing Matt. Nothing would have been worth losing someone who'd loved me the way Matt had. But it was too late to undo the choices I'd made. Matt had moved on with someone who could appreciate what he had to offer, and Trey had moved on too, probably with someone who wouldn't challenge his need for control. I was left alone with the consequences of treating people like they were disposable, of using relationships for temporary comfort instead of building something lasting. 6 months after losing both relationships, I'm still alone and struggling to understand how I could have been so short-sighted and selfish. I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was just trying to survive a difficult situation and keep my options open until I could make a better decision. But I hurt Matt deeply by treating him like a placeholder instead of a real person with real feelings. I hurt myself by throwing away the healthiest relationship I'd ever had for someone who'd never really been available to me. And I hurt Trey too by pretending to be someone I wasn't and building our reunion on a foundation of lies and deception. Now no one wants me, and honestly, I don't blame them. I never meant to hurt anyone, but now no one wants me, and I don't blame them.